Federation title. This is Killer Khan. Killer Khan appears in Madison Square Garden on Monday night, December 29th. This 300-pound mass will square off against the World Wrestling Federation champion, Fred Blassie, namely Bob Backlund.
Before the bright lights of WrestleMania and the cartoonish gimmicks took over professional wrestling, the squared circle was a darker, grittier place, one ruled by bruisers, madmen, and monsters. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, wrestling wasn't about flashy promos or merchandise sales. It was about intimidation, mystique, and violence. Few figures captured that raw fear better than Killer Khan. With his guttural screams, face contorted in rage, and his spewing of magic mist, Khan was a living nightmare, sold to fans as a Mongolian warlord, and remembered by those who witnessed him as one of the most terrifying villains the sport ever produced. Yet despite his unforgettable presence and a red-hot feud with André the Giant, Khan has largely vanished from wrestling's collective memory. In a pre-Hulkamania world, Killer Khan was the perfect monster, a villain built not for marketing, but for menace. This is the story of Killer Khan's rise, his impact, and why, in a pre-Hulkamania world, he was the perfect monster for a very different kind of wrestling landscape. Born Masashi Ozawa in Japan, Khan began his career in the early 1970s under his given name, wrestling for New Japan Pro Wrestling. After several years wrestling in his home country, Ozawa was discovered by wrestling legend Karl Gotch. At the time, America was coming off the Vietnam War and facing an economic crisis fueled by rising gas prices and competition from Japanese automakers. While this may seem unrelated to wrestling, promoters like Gotch knew better. A monstrous Asian heel would tap directly into the resentment of working-class American fans who felt they were losing ground to foreign powers, economically, politically, and culturally. Sensing this, Karl Gotch saw an opportunity. He pitched the idea to Masashi Ozawa, helping to repackage him as a Mongolian destroyer and guide his entry into the US wrestling scene. Rebranded as Killer Khan, he was billed as a savage Mongolian warrior, barefoot, bald except for a top knot with a terrifying scowl. His wrestling style was stiff, explosive, and deliberately erratic. He didn't perform holds as much as he crushed opponents with his forearms, kicked them while down, and unleashed a primal yell that echoed through arenas. Khan would travel around to different territories with his heel gimmick, drawing huge boos and huge money. Eventually, in 1980, Killer Khan moved to Georgia Championship Wrestling. His time there was brief, but it was far from insignificant. In one unassuming tag match, Khan found himself across the ring from André the Giant, a pairing that would foreshadow one of wrestling's most iconic rivalries. Impressed by the snarling, mist-spewing menace, André took notice. When the Giant returned to the World Wrestling Federation, he told Vince McMahon about Khan's intimidating presence and unique in-ring style. That endorsement would be the turning point. Soon after, Khan made his way to New York City and stepped onto the biggest wrestling stage with the WWF, ready to become a true monster in front of millions. Upon arriving in the WWF, Killer Khan was quickly placed into the title contender rotation against reigning champion Bob Backlund. With his rare blend of size, brawling aggression, and legitimate wrestling skill, Khan posed a credible threat to the All-American champion. The feud gave Backlund a fresh, dangerous opponent and gave promoters a new main event draw. Together, they headlined arenas across the territory, including the crown jewel of the WWF circuit, Madison Square Garden. What made Khan so unique was how little he spoke and how much he projected. His menace came from his aura, otherworldly, brutal, and unpredictable. His finishing move, the flying knee drop from the top rope, became infamous not just for its impact, but for how legitimately painful it looked. And then there was the Asian mist, a blinding green spray spat into an opponent's eyes, leaving them writhing and helpless. First popularized by fellow Japanese wrestler the Great Kabuki, the move was as theatrical as it was taboo, blurring the line between martial arts mysticism and outright villainy. When Killer Khan adopted it, the effect was immediate. Gasps from the crowd, chaos in the ring, and the sense that they were witnessing something almost forbidden. Killer Khan's most iconic moment came in 1981, during his legendary feud with André the Giant. In storyline terms, kayfabe, Killer Khan delivered a knee drop so violent it broke André's ankle during a match, sending the beloved Giant to the hospital. This injury made Khan seem almost superhuman. He was the monster who injured the unbreakable. In truth, André broke his ankle while home, but toughened up for a match to help Khan become the biggest heel in the business. In an era where fans still brought knives to arenas to defend babyfaces, Khan's nuclear heat was real. André eventually returned to feud with the killer who broke his ankle. Their rivalry went up and down the East Coast, drawing crowds wherever they went. Killer Khan came off as a legitimate threat to the undefeated Giant, and their brutal encounters at Madison Square Garden are still remembered as some of André's most compelling work during that era. Their feud wasn't just a storyline, it felt personal, violent, and unpredictable. André ultimately got his revenge, but by then, the damage was done. Khan had arrived. Vince McMahon saw the big box office numbers he had envisioned, and the rivalry catapulted Khan to new heights, not only in North America, but also back home in Japan, where his WWF success boosted his star power. The feud was so impactful, it was named Feud of the Year by the Wrestling Observer newsletter, cementing its place in wrestling history and elevating Killer Khan from regional menace to global monster. Khan would continue traveling through the territories, drawing fans in Mid-South, Canada, and Texas. But by the mid-1980s, the wrestling world was changing. Vince McMahon's WWF began prioritizing colorful gimmicks and family-friendly branding. Hulk Hogan's all-American heroism dominated the airwaves, and villains became more exaggerated, more marketable, and ironically, less threatening. Khan, who returned briefly in the late 1980s, felt like a relic. Khan remained a formidable presence in the WWF and continued to face top talent, including the two biggest stars of the era, Hulk Hogan and a newly babyface Macho Man Randy Savage. Khan worked well with both, bringing a sense of danger and unpredictability to their matches. Managed by the ever-devious Mr. Fuji, he still drew solid heat from the crowd. But by this time, the landscape of wrestling had shifted. The WWF was now built around larger-than-life heroes, bright colors, and family-friendly storytelling. Khan's old-school monster persona, rooted in menace and mystique, felt out of step with the cartoonish energy of the Hulkamania era. Despite his credibility in the ring, it was clear his moment had passed. He quietly exited the spotlight, eventually retiring and returning to Japan, where he opened multiple restaurants. A testament to Killer Khan's crossover popularity, both in Japan and the United States, can be found not just in sold-out arenas, but in 8-bit pixels. In 1986, Nintendo released Pro Wrestling for the NES, one of the earliest wrestling games to reach a wide audience. The game featured 6 fictional characters, but for fans of the era, the inspirations were impossible to miss. King Slender was a clear stand-in for Hulk Hogan. Fighter Hayabusa bore a striking resemblance to Antonio Inoki, and King Corn Karn, a mist-spewing chopping menace, was unmistakably modeled after Killer Khan. With his martial arts stance, savage strikes, and signature mist, King Corn Karn brought Khan's terrifying in-ring persona to a generation of kids who may never have seen him, but remembered him every time they picked up a controller. It's subtle, unofficial immortality, proof that even as the business moved on, the image of Killer Khan lingered in the pop culture ether. On December 29, 2023, the wrestling world lost one of its most unforgettable monsters. Killer Khan passed away at the age of 76 from a ruptured artery. The tragic event unfolded at his Tokyo restaurant where he had spent his post-wrestling years serving food to fans who still remembered his reign of terror in the ring. Today, Killer Khan is largely absent from wrestling retrospectives. Part of that is due to how his character was built on tropes that haven't aged well. The foreign menace who snarled in broken English and relied on exotic mysticism. But part of it is also that Khan played a role that doesn't exist anymore. The pure villain. Not an anti-hero, not a cool heel, but a nightmare in human form. Killer Khan was a product of his time. A terrifying force shaped by post-war fears, regional storytelling, and the raw emotion of live crowds. Yet his presence transcended borders, reaching from dimly lit arenas in the American South to 8-bit video games in Japanese living rooms. Khan wasn't designed to be loved. He was made to be feared. And in doing so, he left a permanent scar on wrestling's mythology. In a sport full of flash and spectacle, Killer Khan proved that silence, menace, and mystique could be just as powerful. He may have entered quietly and exited without fanfare, but his legacy looms large, etched into the memories of those who once believed the monster was real.